All right, so I'm sitting here with Jordie tonight. We are on different sides of the world because they're in Australia and I'm in Costa Rica. But we've connected through social media platforms like Twitter in the last little while through our shared love of muscle testing work. And I became aware of the fact that you, Jordie, are writing a book talking a little bit about your journey with kinesiology and muscle testing and energy work. And so I was hoping we could chat a little bit tonight and just find out about, what you're writing about and why is this important?
Cool. Yeah. So the book is it's a memoir. It's interesting because the pivot point for it, the starting point for it was I was in Ireland with my now ex, who is still there. She lives there. Or she's born there, and it was an abusive relationship. And I left and came back home. I was quite lost, and I ended up finding kinesiology. I needed a new career path. Sort of a few months into therapy, I went to a psychologist. I'd started looking and I knew I wanted to do some kind of complementary therapy, and I used to be a dancer. And I knew by the word kinesiology that it was something to do with how the body moves. And I looked more and more into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized this is the thing. And it's interesting because about a year and a half into training with kinesiology, I realized that I used to have a dance teacher that worked with the meridians within her classes. And it took me a year and a half to connect that. But yeah, which is quite bizarre, the way things go. But yeah, I started writing the memoir right at the beginning of the first lockdown here in Australia in March 2020, because I'm renting, and I had some tradespeople come, and they were supposed to do work, and they kept kind of gaslighting me. They were sort of treating me and manipulating me in very similar ways that the way my ex did. And I kind of went into a PTSD response and just started writing the book. And it's been very therapeutic, and of course lots of kinesiology on the way to help me to feel safe to do it, which is, we all need to feel safe to move through the world. Yeah. So I'm still writing it, and I've also had to stop and put it down because some of it can be re-traumatizing to write what's happened in your life. And I've had to realize that I just need to stop for a while and then come back to it when I feel safe again. So I've had several months in between of stopping writing. Yeah.
So in that process, have you been working with other practitioners or doing more like self-balancing kind of work?
Oh, other practitioners. I have a main practitioner that I go to, and then I have other ones as well. Another one is sort of a more energetic in her approach and vibrational in her approach. And I don't know if you've also had that, where you've had several different practitioners for different things. Mm-hmm. In the 10 years since I've been doing kinesiology, I've gone to, several different practitioners. But I think since I've been writing, since the pandemic really, there's been probably more intense sessions, and talking to my clients as well about we're in the middle of a collective consciousness trauma and we need to clear our bodies. Yeah.
Our work has such a huge range, right? Like what we are describing as kinesiology can be, this hurts and I need to reactivate and change the relationship of these muscles, or it can be like, this hurts and there's energetic trauma to interconnected, electrical systems within the body that's, setting up an emotional response and messing with my chemistry. Like those are not the same things, but they're all under this umbrella of this thing we do. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's why we need lots of modalities and lots of practitioners, right? Because it's like, where in this spectrum am I falling right now and what I need?
Yeah.
So how has it been helping you? Like, how has the muscle testing and the kinesiology work facilitated your change?
So when I came back, I'll go from that instance. When I came back to Australia, I went to a psychologist for help, and probably about 9-10 months after I came back is when I started kinesiology. And that's actually when I really noticed deeper changes starting, even though I just started them. I'd never been to a kinesiology session before I started learning. And looking back, I realized the leaps and bounds that happened when I was clearing those stored patterns held in my body. I started to progress in a much more rapid way and release. There was a lot of depression and suicidal ideation. There was a lot of issues that were going on after I left, and kinesiology it has helped me to really move through that and feel safe to be embodied again. And of course, a multitude of different things. I had 23 years of a chronic lower back issue that kinesiology helped get rid of. I was like kind of surprised because it would periodically help, and then like 6 weeks later it would come back again, and then it was just gone. We actually did a unit called pelvic postures in learning, and so I'm not sure which stream of kinesiology you've done, but PKP is the stream that I do, and we have a kinesiopractic, which is like a post-grad 1.5 years, and it's all pelvic postures, and after that unit back pain was gone. Like you said, multiple levels. It could be this muscle connecting with this, or back pain, or emotional, spiritual pain. Yeah, there's so many levels that kinesiology helps with us. It's actually still quite hard to explain 10 years later, 11 years later. And a lot of my clients will say, I don't know what you're doing, but I just know that it works. So, yeah.
Okay. If we can shift to something slightly more maybe political for a moment. Sure. I mean, you and I connected on Twitter, I think, because you were creating like crystal grids that I thought were really beautiful. And so I was looking at those things. But then I've also seen a lot of your posts about trans rights, about the that community, right?
Yeah.
And so it's something that we've talked about a lot in the formation of our college this last year, trying to make sure that we're creating an environment that feels not tolerant, but inclusive, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you have thoughts about what can we be doing as an industry to be helping people to feel included and seen and understood at this time when so many people are hurting?
Yeah, absolutely. So simple things like if you're on Zoom, pronouns, having pronouns next to your name. If you're giving a history sheet for someone, again, pronouns. You don't have to list everything. You don't have to just pronouns. Those folks where that's relevant, everyone has pronouns. A lot of people say, oh, I don't believe in pronouns. You kind of do because you use them every day, but that's a whole other thing. But just having that on people's history sheet when they're signing in, having different things for titles. I've written emails to insurance companies and all sorts of places to include non-gendered titles. So I've been queer since the 90s. I realized I was queer in the 90s. I didn't actually realize that I was trans until a few years ago. And it's anyone who is marginalized needs to find safety in unsafe spaces. So the default in this world is, just in terms of this, is heteronormative, that you're straight, and cisgendered, which means that you align with the gender you're assigned at birth. And a lot of folks more and more don't identify that way. So if you're not the default, you've kind of got to look around and see, am I safe to be myself here? So making sure that it's in your literature. There's a thing here in Australia. There's an organisation called ACON. They do a rainbow tick, where you apply to be a rainbow tick practitioner or business or whatever you do. There'll be a lot of local things in your country, not necessarily government organisations, but like here in Australia, there's Switchboard Victoria, there's Minus 18 Youth, that have resources for all kinds of businesses about how you can create this kind of a safe space. And it's not just for LGBTQIA plus people either. It's for all marginalised folks. I have a friend who's a practitioner here, a complementary health practitioner as well, and they were looking around. They're a person of colour. They were looking around for a wellness centre or a yoga space to practice, and everyone was white. And it's when you look around and you don't, and I'm white, you know, like I don't have to think about that when I go and look for a clinic space if I was. Whereas if you don't feel that kind of belonging, even just having posters up, flags up around your college or in the background, it can help people to just understand that you have an inkling of safety in there. We're not the default, and we're just, I guess we're constantly having to listen to people debating and negating and trying to erase our existence. So the more spaces that just have those little indicators, even just a flag in the background, that can be an indicator that this might be a safe space. So as a trans person, as a gender diverse person, as a queer person, if I'm looking for a practitioner, and also I teach as well, if I've got LGBTQIA plus students coming in, I want to make sure that they know that they're safe in the classroom, and you have to feel safe to be able to learn effectively as well. And also clear your stuff out of your body too. I know a lot of folks in my community who have gone to practitioners and not gone back because they just didn't feel safe. There was just no knowledge, and it takes work. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say I can give you a sheet and it will give you all the information you need to know. But yeah, just using people's pronouns and with any client, helping them to feel safe with you in whatever way that form that comes. There'll be a lot of things that you don't know about. I don't know about what every trans person's experience is just because I'm trans. And I will say what things like, you know, the usual practitioner question, what's that like for you? Or how does your experience show in that way? You know, the usual kinds of questions that we might ask. Yeah.
I ended up working with a gentleman, and we're going back maybe 10 years, who had ended up in one of my classes, and then later, you know, came out as trans, and ended up hiring him. And so through working with him, working with his partner, being able, it was really a wonderful learning experience for me, because we had built up a friendship. So it was one of those times when I could ask things that I didn't know without feeling super awkward, right? I could be like, this might be a terrible question, but, and he was very tolerant of me. But the other thing, I mean, what really shocked me when we started working together was his experience of how he felt he had been treated in the medical community. Yes. And it was, yeah, as you say, when you fit in the box of what people expect, you know, you don't always see some of the negative things that are happening, right?
Yeah.
I was shocked to realize that he had been treated in that way. And I just remember going, I never want anyone to walk out of my office feeling like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
it just felt so important.
Yeah, I mean, even a couple of friends that are from Melbourne, from here, that have had top surgery and going the specific hospitals that do it, and they were misgendered multiple times, even in that space, having had surgery, feeling unsafe, middle of the pandemic, they couldn't have a person with them because of the, I don't know if you know about the intensity of lockdowns in Melbourne, but it was pretty horrendous. And they were just in this, they felt unsafe in that space, and they just had surgery. So like, yeah, you're right. It's not, it is awkward. They are awkward conversations. And you may get people, I've had times where I have been exhausted because there's almost like a justification of your existence on a consistent basis. And sometimes I simply don't have the capacity to answer questions. And I'll just say, Google it. Like and that's like it will, you know, like there's a ton of information out there, and you may not get the exact information you need, but at the same time, having that understanding that it's a lot of emotional labor, and it's often unpaid labor, and it's exhausting. So I've really had to learn to say I actually don't have capacity, or sometimes I snap, because you're right, it can be awkward. It can be awkward to ask questions. Yeah, and it can be awkward all around. But like you said, we're saying right in the beginning, that staying in that space of empathy and compassion and kindness on all sides, if possible, can always helps.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. Out of curiosity, and you can of course pass on this one if you like, do you have an example of a kind of question where you're just like, I do not have the emotional capacity to deal with that kind of question right now?
When people talk about the kids getting the misinformation that's out there that is perpetuated by people who are TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, like, I'm just going to be completely honest, J.K. Rowling. There are a lot of them out there. So this makes me tear up because it's such an invasive thing. Growth hormone, the hormones that are given, hormone blockers that are given, they're not given lightly. There's probably at least a year of therapy and multiple practitioners that kids and parents go to in order to receive those hormone blockers. And cisgender kids get them as well, but they don't have to go through all of this. I know of ballet dancers who have been given them so that they stop growing for a time, because of course ballerinas have to be petite and not very well developed. Other athletes, there's other reasons, and medical reasons as well. There are, there is so much misinformation out there. So that's actually really hard to, and it's hard to, because people say, well, justify it. Show me where the evidence is. I'm like, just do some research. Not from J.K. Rowling, because that's a lot of the stuff that she says just been it's made up. It's all been debunked. There's no instances of issues in bathrooms. There's, like, people go to the toilet to go to the toilet. I mean, the number of trans folks that have ended up with urinary tract infections, bladder infections, kidney infections, because they do not go to the toilet in public. Because where do they go? If they're not allowed in their preferred bathroom, where do they go? If they go to the other bathroom, what might happen with them? I know of many butch dykes who have gone into a female, who identify as female, butch dykes, who've gone into a female bathroom and been kicked out. and people asking, what is your genitalia? All those kinds of things. Would you ask anyone that question? It's like, it really, when you really think about it, how could you ask a child that question? How could you think that it's okay to, I'm getting kind of impassioned now, how can you think that it's okay to check a child for what their anatomy is before they go to a bathroom or before they play sport? You know, like that's abuse. So there's yeah, there's so many. I mean, at the moment we've got an election in less than a month here, and trans women in sport is just like headlines everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I know it is worldwide as well, well, in America anyway, but it's like, surely that's like, most women, any woman in sport are totally fine with any woman playing sport. So and you did ask me what questions. It sort of depends on, you know, that are really hard to answer. I guess there's a few in there, but it's kind of hard to think in the moment, because sometimes it literally depends on my capacity at that time.
Right.
Yeah. And I've had people say things like, there was some incidents in a classroom with a non-binary student, and they'd been misgendered quite a bit and ended up snapping. I was like, well, yeah, if you've been, I put it to people this way. My name's Jordie. When I was quite young, Jordie wasn't a very common name at all, and people used to call me Judy and Jodie and Georgie, and I even had Jordina and all sorts of different names. And even as a little kid, I'd correct them. And if they kept doing it, I either went into a fight response, got quite aggressive, or I just run away from them. I didn't want to know them. So if you're constantly being called the wrong name, of course it's going to have an impact on you. And misgendering feels like a punch in the guts every time it happens. So eventually those punches in the guts just build up and you might snap.
When somebody accidentally does it, what, I mean, and again, I know that you're not speaking for everyone or anything of this sort. You know, I'm working with several teenagers right now who are either trans or they're non-binary. And I know that sometimes there have been times when I've been like really into something and I will accidentally use the wrong pronoun. Yeah. I usually catch it and apologize, but then sometimes I find myself wondering, is it worse to bring attention to it, or is that the right way of handling it? Or
yeah, so for most people, it's literally just change it and move on.
Okay.
There's no big deal, because some people apologize profusely. I actually had it the other way around, where my kinesiologist misgendered me and said sorry, just quick sorry, and changed it. And I said that's okay, which is a natural people pleaser response. That's what I like. That's, you know, I'm a big people pleaser, still working through that stuff. But and she kept insisting, and I said that's okay. She said, no, it's not. And I was like, no, it's okay. And she said, no, it's not. So she actually held me to account to not go into that people pleaser response. It can happen the other way. So that probably the simplest thing for most people, most trans folks that I know, is just correct yourself and move on. Not to make a big deal out of it. And also maybe let your clients know that you want to make the space as safe as possible for them. If there's anything that you're doing or way that you've dealt with things that is not working for them, please let for them to let you know, because it will be individual. Some people, who knows, like, I don't know, you know, what each individual needs, and neither does anyone really, but I guess you can just put that out there as well. But yeah, most people, it's just correct yourself, move on.
Okay. So maybe lastly, we were discussing before, and it was you brought it up actually more into the context of race and people of color, but like as a group, our industry is pretty homogenous. I think maybe it's the word I want to use right now.
Yeah.
And there's not a huge amount of diversity that you see in race and orientation, in anything of that sort. There's starting to be more, I think, but I find myself wondering if, like, how do we as an industry be really inclusive and reach out more so that, because I think about it, like, I'm the best practitioner to people that I understand on the table, right?
Yeah.
And I can be a good practitioner to anybody, but I think, okay, well, somebody who's been through a similar circumstance is maybe going to be a better practitioner for that person, right? Because they can bring their own experience and empathy. So how are we limiting the kind of people that we can help when there's a certain homogenization of practitioners available? Yeah,
Well,
so
it's interesting. You say that. I've for the last, along with the book's sort of taken precedence, but I've been working on developing a program for any practitioners, not just kinesiologists, but there's a whole kinesiology element to it, of looking at the systems of oppression of practitioners being trauma-informed to help with this very thing that you're asking about. Because, okay, this might be a bit controversial, the way that I phrase this, but there is a very much a whitewashing of the wellness industry. And there's a lot of people who do not honor the origins of their practice and do not recognize the Chinese medicine that is inherent in what we do as kinesiologists, yoga practitioners, shamans, all sorts of people not understanding the depth and breadth of the impact of systems of oppression that have on people. And partly what you were saying before about having LGBTQIA plus people feeling safe in our classrooms and in our practitioner spaces. I actually put it out there a little bit when we first had the sort of interaction about doing this, about what do you need, and a few people said they want their practitioner to be informed about systems of oppression. There's something that I call the 4 Ps of patriarchy, which is proving productivity, which serves patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy, people-pleasing and perfectionism. So patriarchy wants us to be all of those things. Prove that you're good enough. Prove that you're that you care, that you love people, that you're a great practitioner. It's very much embedded in our society. That's why I'm kind of creating that program. But even if you went and Googled systems of oppression and just had a look at how those systems are set up to keep certain people in certain spaces and levels, I'm not really sure of the wording specifically, but and those systematic structures are in place so that the defaults stay the default. So that white people, able-bodied people, specifically white cisgendered men, are supposedly at the top of the hierarchy. But yeah, straight people, cisgender people, all the defaults stay the default, and then everyone else has to just vie for attention and approval and fit in somewhere, rather than creating an ambient sense of belonging, which would be so lovely, which is what you're actually endeavoring to do, create that ambient sense of belonging. Yeah.
Right, and that's why I feel like it's so important to have these conversations, and to have these conversations in not just in private with our friends, but also to have them in public spaces.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's confrontational. It's you know, like I have privilege because I'm white. I have privilege because I'm able-bodied. I have privilege because I am from a middle class kind of background. I'm pretty well educated, though that's my privilege. Everyone has privilege, whatever part of society you're aligned with. We all have some kind of privilege. We often don't think about it. People think of privilege as I've worked really hard for this, so you know, it's not privilege. It's not about that. It's about unearned privilege. I have privilege because I am born white. I do not have to go through the world as a person of color, a Black person, an Indigenous person, and face the things that those folks have to face. Every single clinic I've ever had has had a staircase, which for anyone who has difficulty climbing stairs, who is not able-bodied in that way, they don't have access to my service. So unless I'm doing an online session. So it's, yeah, there's things that we don't necessarily think about, and it's confrontational and awkward to think about, but we really need to. Yeah.
I agree. Do you have anything that you want to throw in here before we're kind of wrapping up? Okay. Well, in that case, thank you just so much for being willing to hang out in this space and have this conversation with me.
Thank you. Thanks for instigating it. It's been a privilege.